Hello everyone, this is the 31st video of my database management systems practical video series. Today I'm going to discuss the 31st question of the question list. So here's the question list, and if you watch the previous videos, we answered to the question set started from question 17 and it ended in question 30, which is the last video. And with this question 31, we are going to start a new series, and this is the first video of that question series. Let's read the question first as usual and then answer for this one. Here's the question. The bill book system is used to keep information on the bills of the shoe store called Aralia Shoe Center. This method is used for a long time, but using this method will embarrass the shop owner and employees. The accountant working in the shop pointed out to the shop owner the disadvantages of the bill book system. The disadvantages pointed out were the loss of bill books, damage to bill books, and the need for separate space for storing bill books. Because of these factors, the store owner realizes that the bill book system is difficult to use and decides to use computer software. The software was developed by AISoft, a software development company. You work as a senior software engineer at this company. You and your team are tasked with creating the database of this software. Create the ER diagram for that. To this, follow the instructions below. Name the database as Aralia Shoe Center. Before answering to this question, let me highlight a very important part. In the question, you can see there's a store called Aralia Shoe Center, and this shop is using the bill book system to keep the informations about the business they done in the shop. But here you can see the accountant working in the shop pointed out the shop owner the disadvantages of the bill book system. There are some disadvantages in the bookkeeping method. You can see the first one is loss of bill books. If you use a bookkeeping method to store informations, there are some problems you have to face, like misplacing books. If you misplace a book you use to store informations, if you couldn't find that book, you will not going to recover the informations recorded in those books. And also there's another problem, damage to bill books. If somehow these books are damaged, you couldn't recover the informations, like there are insects who can damage to these books, and also with fire or like that, these books will easily damaged and those details will be not recoverable. And there's a third problem, the need for separate space for storing bill books. You can see these bill books are going to take a lot of physical space than a computer software. If you use a computer software, these problems are going to solve, like loss of bill books. If you use a software, you can't lose the details in this software like bill books, because these details are not going to misplace, and always we can create backups in the system, and we can use these backups to recover the informations. And also damage to bill books, the computer software is not going to damage, because even the computer which contains this software was damaged. We can easily replace the system and use a backup to recover the informations of the software. And also, like I said earlier, there are computers which takes a very small amount of physical space than a bookkeeping method. So all of these three disadvantages or the problems can be solved by using a computer software. And also there are some other advantages, like when we come to the data searching part, not like bookkeeping method, we can easily and very efficiently and very speedily find the details using a computer software other than a bookkeeping method. If you use a bookkeeping method, you have to find a dedicated employee for keep the informations in books, and also find the informations out from these books, and a human can't compete with the speed of a computer. So if you use a computer software, you can find your informations in seconds other than a bookkeeping method. Okay, so that's the question. And after that, let's move on to the ER diagram. Here we have to create the ER diagram. Before creating the database, we usually create the entity relation diagrams and also ER diagrams. In this case, we have to name the database as Aralia Shoe Center, and here's the first guideline we have to follow. Create a user table for storing the information of all the customers and all the suppliers in this store as shown below. Okay, that's the first instruction. We have to create a table inside this database Aralia Shoe Center called user, and these are the attributes or also columns to create in this user table. User ID, first name, last name, contact number, and status. You can see by using this table, we are going to store the details of a user. There are two types of users, customer and suppliers, and both of all the details of both of these parties are going to store in this user table. Okay, first create this table and then go to the next part. To create the ER diagram, there are many softwares to create this. To design this diagram, there's an official software called Workbench, which will come with the MySQL server, and that's the official software. In this video, I'm going to use that software, and there are some third-party softwares like Navicat used to create these ER diagrams. Here we are in MySQL Workbench, and this is the connection to our MySQL server, which is the database management systems. Let's click on this one, and now we are in the MySQL server, and these are the databases we created earlier. Here you can see ExamMarkDB. This is the database we used in the previous set of videos, and in this software the databases are also called schemas. Now we are going to create an ER diagram. For that, you have to click the file option and new model. In this software, the ER diagrams are also called models. So let's create that one. First, we can rename the database. Here you can right click on the database name and click edit schema, and now we can rename this one. You can see we have to rename this one to Aralia Shoe Center. Okay. Okay. This is the database name. You can see the changed we done to this database automatically saved you don't have to manually save the informations. In this software, the details are going to automatically saved. And now we can create our diagram, add diagram. Double click on that button, and now we are in our workspace to create this diagram. These are the tools they gave us to create our diagram. Here there's a tool to create new tables, and also these are the relationships. If you watch the previous videos, you know how to use these tools. Later in this series, I will again show you how to use them too. First, I'm going to create a new table. Click on this tool, and then click somewhere in this free space, and it will create a new table. Now we can edit this table by right click on that table name and then edit table 1. Okay, now we can rename the table. I'm going to rename it to user. Here's the table name user. This is the main table, and these are the attributes. User ID, this is the primary key, and it's also going to be auto incremented, and this is the data type int. If you want to use the auto increment option, there's an option to choose auto increment here. AI means the auto increment option, and that means when we create records, the values in this field will be auto incremented. Every time we create new records, this ID will be auto incremented, and this is the data type which supports to that option. The integer values are the data type we can use with mathematical operators. You can't use string values or the characters with mathematical operators, only numerical values. So in this case, I'm going to use the integer data type. Okay, here let's create this one, user ID, and now you don't have to manually check the primary key and then auto increment. We can just click on the auto increment option, and it will automatically check the primary key option and also the not null option, because there can be only one attribute which will be the primary key, and also the primary key can be the only attribute which will auto increment. Okay, and that's the first attribute. Here you can see the data type is automatically changed to int, and now we can create other attributes: first name, last name, contact number, status. These are the data types. First name, last name, and contact number will store string values. That's why the data type is varchar, and these are the character length. By using this character length option, we are defining how many characters which will store in a single cell in this attribute. So this attribute will store characters up to 45 characters in a single cell. Okay, now let's create these parts. Here's the second one, first name, and here you can see the data type is automatically varchar and character length is 45. I'm going to click the not null option here, and after that here's the last name. It's also going to be same as the first name field, and let's create contact number. In this attribute, we don't need to use a large amount of character length. We can use we can store we can define this attribute to store only 10 characters, up to 10 characters, because usually a mobile number is going to be 10 characters. So let's change that number 10, and this is the last one, status. Okay, in the status attribute, by using this attribute, we are going to define the status of the user, whether this user is active or a deactive user. Only the active users can access the system. By using this option, we can mark users and mark the status as deactive, so those deactive users can't access this system. Okay, that's the purpose of this attribute, and we completed the user table. There will be more attributes. For now, we create the first part of the question, and let's move to the second one. Create a gender table for storing the gender of all the customers and all the suppliers in this store as shown below. Okay, we have to create a separate table to store gender of the users. Here we can create new table and then press right click and edit and change the table name to gender. In the gender table, you can see these are the only two attributes, gender ID and gender name, but gender is a attribute or a property of a user. So there's a problem that why we don't mention, or why we don't create a new attribute in the user table to store gender. If we use that method, create a new attribute called gender and store the gender of the user, every time you create a record or you register a user in the system, you have to mention or you have to record the gender of this user as male, female, or if there's another gender type, you have to write that gender name. So if there are 5 users and all of those users are males, you can see the word male is going to repeat every time you create a record of a male user and also a female user. Every time you have to repeat the gender name. So you can see there are 4 characters for to represent the name gender. But if we create a separate table and store the names of the gender, male, female, and if there's a third option and that name, and we give every name a unique ID and store that ID in the main table, that way we can do the same process. We can represent the user's gender but with less characters. Only the gender, we are going to use only the gender ID. So gender ID will be number 1 and 2, like that. So we don't have to use 4 characters. We can do the same process with only single character. That's why we used a separate table. Now let's create this table. Here in the gender table, first attribute will be gender ID, and it's going to be int, and also we have to check the auto increment option. And here's the last one, gender name. We don't have to define 45 characters we can change it to 10 because male, female, like those names are those names can store with uh, below 10 characters. Okay, now we create the gender table too, and here's the third part. Create a table named user type to store the type of users. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, now we have to create another separate table, and this is also a property of a user. In this table, we are going to store the names of the types. What are the types of users? In this case, you can see there are two types of users, customer and supplier. By using this method, we can create an ID to represent a customer and supplier, and use that ID to mark the users. Okay, let's create this table. Create new table and right click on that table and edit table. Then let's change this one to user type. This is the user type table, and this is the first attribute, user type ID, and this is also going to be auto incremented. And this is the last attribute, user type name, and we can leave the default data type varchar, and character length is 45. And this is the third table, user type. You can see now we can create a foreign key using these IDs, gender ID and user type ID, and foreign those IDs into the main table user. Here is the fourth one, create a system login table to store the login details of software users. In this software, we are not going to store the login details in the user table. We are going to create a separate table to store the login details like username, password, like that, and create a login ID to those records, and we can also foreign that ID to the main table. Okay, let's create this table too, which is system login. Create new table and edit that table. Change this to system login. And here's the first attribute, login ID, and then username and password. Here the character length of username is 20 and password is the default value and data type. Okay, login ID, and this is going to be auto incremented. And here's the next attribute, username, and let's change the character length to 20. And here's the last attribute, password, and we can leave the default data type and character length, and let's take the not null option here. Here in the user table, let me do a quick change. In the status attribute, here you can see we can define a default value to this this attribute. If there will be no data stored in this attribute, the database system will automatically add the value we gave to this field into the fields which have no data added by the user. So we can input number 1 by default. So number 1 means he is an active user. So by default all the users created in the record table are going to be active users, and if there's any problem with that account, we can easily change this to number 2 or like that to change the status and mark this user as a deactive user. Okay, and that's how we use the default or expression option. Now the user table is complete. Now we can create this table, the address table. Create a table called address to store the addresses of the software users. To do so, use the instructions below. Okay, this is the new table. In this table, we have to create these attributes. Obviously, we have to create an ID to identify a record uniquely, and this ID will be the primary key of this table, and the ID will be automatically incremented. And here's the next attribute, number. This is the number of the address and street 1 and street 2. Let's create these attributes. Here I create a new table and then edit that one, change this to address, and first one is address ID, and let's auto increment this one, and it will automatically check the primary key option. And here's the next attribute, number. All the character lengths are 45. Number, not null. Street 1, street 2, and these are the attributes in the address table. Now again we can use the default expression. There can be addresses without numbers, so we can input a default value as empty. I'm going to input a value as empty. So if the user didn't enter the number of the address, the value of that attribute will be empty. Okay, here's the first one. And in the street 2 there can be addresses, there can be short addresses which will take only street 1 option. So we can create a default value to street 2. I'm changing it to empty, like the number of the address. Okay, now if the number of the address and the street 2 option is will not inserted, the default value will be empty. Okay, now we create the address table 2. Let's go to the question again. Here here's the last part. Create a table called city to store the cities of the software users' addresses. To do so, use the instructions below. Also we can store the city name in the address table, but if you use that method, you have to repeat the user city every time, and also you have to give the permission to decide the city, to enter the name of the city to user. If you do that part, if you do so, the city name, the same name can be stored differently with different users. But if you create a separate table and store values of the city, names of the cities, and then give the option to choose the city of the user, we can store the city name using a single character or less characters, then storing the city name in the address name directly, and also we can create a standard to store city names. So user is not going to type the city name, he have to choose the city of that user in the city name list in this city table. Okay, now let's create this one. Here let's create new table and then edit table. The name is city, and here's the first attribute, city ID, and then city name. Okay, city ID, and it's going to be auto incremented, and city name. And this is the final table. We completed all the instructions we have to follow in order to answer to this question. In this question, we are not going to define the relationships between these tables. I think we have to create these relationships in future videos. And that's it for this video. Let's see you in a next one. Thank you very much for watching.